Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome back to another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Today, we're talking about how the new Nacha rules help combat fraud with the inimitable Paul Galloway, Senior Advisor here at Strategic Treasurer. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Appreciate being back.
Absolutely. So getting right into it, Paul, what should we know about the growth in ACH activity, in particular same-day ACH volumes? How has this impacted fraud activity?
Well, we definitely have seen an increase in ACH activity, in particular with same-day transactions. Corporations are becoming more and more comfortable with doing that, getting some belt and suspenders around protecting payments that they do on a same-day basis and being able to monitor what's going on with that activity. As you might guess, if you have increased ACH activity, there's probably increased fraud attempts that are occurring out there. And we're definitely continuing to see that fraud attempts on ACH payments persist. It hasn't necessarily shrunken by any measurable standard.
Okay, so as ACH volume grows, so grows fraud. How do we get out in front of that? Well, one of the ways, perhaps, are these new Nacha rules. What are the new Nacha rules, and what is the scope of the rule changes? And then I'm going to have a follow-up kind of after this.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So as you think about the new Nacha rules, it's really focused on combating fraud and stopping the fraudsters who are using technology against corporations to steal money. And so in doing that, they've set up these rules specifically to help organizations position themselves to monitor the risk associated with ACH fraud. And so there's compliance phases, and the expectations are that corporations are going to adopt what the new rules are stating. So the first date of phase one is March 20th of 2026. And this applies to corporate end users that send ACH payments of $6 million or more on an annual basis. So it's a relatively low threshold for many corporations who are of larger size and engage in a lot of ACH transactions. So it's not like it's a huge hurdle to overcome for many organizations. The second phase is in June of 2026. And so this extends the requirement to all corporate end users that send any kind of ACH transaction on an annual basis. So within a given year, if you're doing ACH transactions, compliance is expected to come into play at that June 22nd, 2026. So what's this mean for treasury teams? You know, the obligations are the key components. It's focused on corporate payment operations, anybody within the organization that effectuates a payment that involves ACHs. It also targets vendor onboarding and how you manage that risk, and payment instructions where there's changes either on the AP or AR workflows. And so it's expected that there'll be fraud monitoring that occurs. So the compliance aspect of this is that if corporates aren't complying with these new standards, which really are, if you think about, warranted from a perspective of not only just Nacha, but just as a corporate treasurer, it's something that I would be focused on in that role, is ensuring that we're doing everything we can to protect the payments that we effectuate or payments that come in. So if you don't comply, there could be regulatory penalties. Of course, you could be exposing yourself to increased fraud, which leads to financial losses, could damage the corporation's image or reputation. It could also disrupt your banking services, so you're not getting payments out when you need them out, and your bank may have some challenges with more fraud activity if the monitoring's not there. We believe that the monitoring is going to be beneficial and help organizations from a fraud control standpoint.
Yeah, you read my mind on my next question. It was going to be about the implications of this, but maybe we can get even more practical. What do I, as a treasurer, need to do between now and when these rule changes take effect in 2026?
Well, the first thing is if you haven't already read the rules, the new rules, they're pretty straightforward. You need to get out there and take a look at those. Make sure you understand what is being asked in those rules and start preparing your organization for the changes. Prepare now, especially with any organization that's going to hit that phase 1 deadline in March. You want to make sure that you have things in place so that as phase 1 starts or begins, you don't want to start preparing then. Start preparing today. Make sure that you have monitoring capabilities in place, that anybody with an organization that effectuates ACH payments or receipts of ACH payments are up to speed on what the new processes should be for monitoring for the risks associated with fraud. So I think these are the kinds of things that corporate treasurers can do today to get them ready, as well as around anytime you're onboarding a vendor or there's a notification of a change, your treasury folks and your payment teams, it could be AP, AR, when there are changes or someone that's new, make sure that they're trained and understand the policy and procedures tied to the ACH payments, how they manage changes to vendor information, how they do their out-of-band validation of the changes. Make sure that they know what those steps are that they take, and it's something that's consistent in what they're doing to ensure that you don't have or give criminal opportunity to commit fraud and steal money from your organization.
What is the ACH fraud framework?
This is the basic framework that treasurers should, at least this is how we view it. This is the framework that will help strengthen their ability to monitor, to understand returns that come to them and what to do, next steps, the communication of the activity, what's going on from a fraud perspective. So fraud monitoring, involves originator, third parties, and financial institutions. So it is across the board, you got to monitor the payment from origination to execution. And along the way, you're going to be looking for where there's a discrepancy, perhaps in payment instructions, changes that may have occurred, whether it's vendors or whether it's a fraudster who got a hold of a payment and changed something. You need to have monitoring systems, processes in place to ensure that the payment integrity is kept. So when it comes to the receiving depository institution, It's ACH credit monitoring. It's exemptions from funds available, and then the expanded use of the R17 RRC, or return reason code. So this is on the returns, the expansion of the originating depository financial institution, or ODFI, on return requests. So all of these are opportunities where a fraudster might attempt to change something or pose as somebody they're not to get a corporation to deliver a payment to an account that they control. So it's standardizing all these and setting up the monitoring tools to execute on that.
So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe we can dive in just a little bit deeper as we wrap up here. How would you suggest we approach monitoring fraud across the fronts that are relevant to us as treasurers, such as our banks, policies, procedures? What advice do you have there?
Yeah, I think this is a really important aspect, and the framework itself gives you an idea of the construct, but actually executing on it, that's the harder part, right? Sure, I can tell you, hey, you need to monitor, but how do you do that? So when you think about monitoring fraud, it's a risk-based approach. Where are the risks at? How do you monitor those risks? How do you differentiate between something that's high risk versus low risk? Monitoring transactions prior to processing, that gives you the greatest opportunity to detect where fraud might lie. So you definitely need to have a process before the payment goes out the door to ensure the integrity of that file that's delivered is maintained. As well as when you find something that's high potential fraud, your originator, whoever that is, needs to have some type of action you can take to ensure that fraud isn't being committed. So maybe it's stopping the process, flagging the transaction, consulting with the receiver, doing internal monitoring. It's your teams, it's utilizing systems that may raise red flags, and then using the results of account validation, whether that's being done through your bank or a third party. That account validation component is going to be important to helping you monitor fraud. So your banks offer these services, and it's something that we do encourage our clients to take advantage of those fraud services or payment security services. They have validation services that you can utilize, and you should take advantage of those. It'll help you in the process, and it should be part of your monitoring framework. So when we think about policy versus procedures, so policy kind of sets, the standard, what's expected. Procedures is tied to the actions that are taken. So you need to document the procedures. You need to have it written out. You need to have vendor verification process in place, and your people need to be trained on what those procedures are. It needs to be reviewed periodically. It needs to be tested and then updated when there's a need for changes. As fraud continues to advance in terms of techniques and technology to steal from corporations, the review and test approach is going to help them ensure that they have the best procedures in place to prevent fraud. And once you have that, you lock it down. You audit. You have people in the process that it's based on roles within the organization. Only certain people have the ability to effectuate these transactions, and then you just got to continually monitor. When it comes to the vendor changes, you need to make sure that you're using an out-of-band validation process anytime there's changes with a vendor. Address, account information, contact information. You got to use something that you already have on file. Don't utilize something that comes to you for a change. It could be something that comes in the form of an email, maybe a phone call, maybe a letter. Who knows? It could be any of those. But when something comes in as a notification of change, you need to do something outside of what's in either stated on the call or in the email or the letter. Use what you have on file. Contact the organization to verify that the changes are valid. And then the last piece, or last couple pieces, the first one is around automation. So identity verification. Being able to validate using those services we talked about, either a third party or your bank, being able to validate on an automated basis will help. You can do that continuously. You can validate name, address, account numbers, anything for sanction screening. You can set up screening analytics that using technology systems that you utilize within the organization or third party provided. And then payment monitoring. If you are doing daily automated bank reconciliation of the transactions that come in for prior day, that is going to be helpful. If you're monitoring the activity during the current day as things are transacting, that can also help you figure out if there's fraud, potential for fraud. So what does the timeline to readiness look like? Folks haven't already engaged in this kind of activity, then they need to get moving. Do a gap assessment of where you have processes or procedures that aren't ready for the changes that are coming, and get your teams up to speed in your systems and the third-party services, whether it's a bank or otherwise. Make sure you have those in place. When it comes to automation in 2026, you should think about this being continuous in the sense that you're doing this every day. You're monitoring vendor identities. You're working on increasing your technical skills and abilities to prevent fraud. So this may involve training, coaching, and periodic check-ins with your teams that effectuate ACHs. This is all geared towards reducing fraud footprint, the ability for fraudsters to steal from your organization, and preparation and planning and reviewing, testing, updating. These are all steps that organizations need to take.
These have been a lot of helpful, practical steps that we can take to combat fraud and prepare for these ACH rule changes. Paul, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Treasury Update Podcast. This is your host, Brian Weeks. We will see you next time.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update Podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.